Welcome to Just Minded My Business Media, LLC, where you get information that you can use. I'm your host, Ida Crawford, but before we dive in, subscribe to Just Minded My Business on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Share Just Minded My Business with your family, friends, and colleagues. Engage with us by leaving a review or comment. Your support keeps this podcast going and growing. Visit our website at jmmbmediallc.com to learn how we can support you in getting more visibility on your products and services. So grab a pen and paper and get ready for information that you can use. Welcome to Just Minding My Business. We're glad you stopped by. I'm your host, Ida Crawford. Need more visibility on your products or services? Visit us at jmmbmediallc.com to learn more. Strategy is a commodity. Execution is an art. Peter Drucker. I am so happy to bring to you today Ryan Hayes, who has been doing strategy work for more than 2 decades at some of the nation's leading academic institutions, including Dartmouth, Emory and Princeton. During this time, he has provided strategic counsel to multiple university presidents and governing boards and co-authored several strategic plans. He currently serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer at the University of Cincinnati. So welcome, Ryan. We are so happy that you're here today. And as I was going through your bio and everything, it was like, this is going to be hot.
Well, I hope it's worthwhile for you and useful. That was the goal of the book, is to make it useful. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. And what is the name of your book?
So the name of the book is Strategists First: How to Defeat the Strategy Trap.
Okay, so what is the strategy trap?
So the strategy trap, as I see it, is tendency, in fact, this tradition of treating strategy as the rock star and strategist as the roadies, right? So in the case of a concert, right, the rock star gets all the attention and the roadies, do all the work and get none of the credit. And that's essentially what's happened with strategy over the past 50 years. Is strategy has made a career out of ignoring the strategists, the very people who are creating strategy. And so there's this entire literature, entire body of commentary, and it's even baked into academic programs in which the focus is on strategy. And what you don't see, which I think is the big miss here, is any real effort to build a language, and in fact, kind of a training around strategists. So when I wrote this book, it came from a very practical place, and that is I've been doing strategy work for 2 decades in my career. It's been the focus of my career, and people would often come up to me and say, "Hey, you seem really good at strategy work. I want to know how to do it. I want to learn how to be good at strategy work." And what I realized is there wasn't a book on the market for that. There were plenty of books on strategy. In fact, it's a cottage industry, and I would say it's probably overrun with books on strategy and leadership. But what I wasn't able to find in the market was a book on a how-to guide on how to be a strategist. And that was the whole purpose of writing this book, was to be able to say to someone, whether it's a leader or follower, if you want to be a strategist, start with this book, and it'll get you on your journey.
Yes, because you're right. That the word strategy gets thrown around everywhere. I see so many titles. I'm a strategist this and I'm a strategist that. And I sometimes wonder, do they really understand what a strategist is?
Great question. And I would say that, by and large, so back to your point about strategy as a concept, right? So there were a couple academics that several years ago did a study, because everyone was throwing around the term strategy. And so they thought, well, let's see if we can find a common definition. So they went through the literature on strategy for about 15 years worth of literature. And what they found was there was 91 different definitions to what is strategy. And granted, that study is now over a decade old, and so you can imagine in that time there's probably been another 90 some definitions of strategy. And so we think of strategy thinkers and writers like Peter Drucker, who you referenced earlier. But again, it's telling that while we look to those folks to be kind of the gurus of strategy, that we can't even align on a standard definition, which again I think speaks to the fact that it means many things to many people, right? It's sort of a Rorschach test where some people see an ink block test where they see a boat, a butterfly or a barn. It depends on sort of who you ask, and I think that's part of the challenge is that you can't even align on the basic definition, and how can you be expected to really move forward in even greater understanding? And so the other thing that I mentioned in the book, which I think is telling once you have eyes to see it, is organizations will ensure that when a person performs accounting, or they perform auditing functions, or they perform cybersecurity, or they perform finance, they ensure that those people have training to do that, right? They would never let somebody in to do complex accounting work or auditing work and never be trained. But yet every day corporations and organizations are asking their employees to do strategy work without ever training them to do so.
Wow. So what is strategy? Let's get your definition of it.
So there are 91 at least out there, and not more. So I would say my definition is unique to me. I would say that folks would need to sort of craft their own, but for me, it's every definition of strategy has to start with strategy first, which means put the person first in terms of who's doing the strategy, and then all strategy flows from there. So I would say that strategy is the work of the strategist, right? It has to be focused on the who of the efforts and not the what, right? When you talk about a plan, it's a what. When you talk about a strategist, you talk about a who. And the old saying I'm sure you're familiar with is players win championships and playbooks don't, right? So you got to start with the people first, and that's my definition of strategy. Is it's a strategist first endeavor.
Yes. So one of the questions I have for you, are strategists born or are they made? Let me just ask that question.
So great question, Ida. Phenomenal question, and it's one that I get pretty often. And I would say you can certainly be born one, and that's great. But the vast majority, the rest of us, were made, right? That we did this over trial and error over many years, if not decades. And what I was trying to do with this book is to create a little bit of a hack, right? Like, how could you get there a little bit faster, a little bit, less bumps and bruises along the way in terms of, having the stars to show of hard lessons learned. That was the purpose of this book, is to create sort of that how-to guide. So I would say, at my core, I believe that strategists, are more fashioned than found, right? They're more made. And it doesn't preclude someone being born with this skill set, but I think it's more important that even if you're born with some innate skills, that you really commit to perfecting those. And so that's what the book does. It's got a formula that I sort of, just for memory's sake, I go through sort of the 5 habits of a strategist, the 4 skills, the 3 questions, the 2 fixes, the 1 mission, and the 0 doubt. So I kind of do a countdown of what are the attributes of a strategist.
Yes. And now that you mentioned that, what are they? Just give us a few of them.
Sure. Yeah. So in my experience, and I'll stick to the habits. In my experience, strategists have 5 habits that they're really good at. The first is leading time. So, right, we talk a lot about time management, but strategists actually talk about time leadership, which means they lead time. They don't manage it, right? So every decision is based on what's the highest and best use of my time. Because if there's one thing that we know about strategists, is they need time to think, right? They need time to get away from the noise of our day-to-day sort of organizational lives and really do deep think. And so deep think can't happen in shallow surroundings, right? And so that's why out of the gate, if you want a great litmus test to determine if someone's a strategist, look how they're using their time, right? If they're leading time, they're more likely than not to be a good strategist. So that's the first habit. The second habit is they have the ability to impose clarity. They can take really complex and chaotic conversations and they can really simplify for everyone involved. I consider these to be sort of the main things to focus on. So they've got the ability to really impose clarity on complexity and chaos. So that's the second habit. The third habit is they really have the ability to push upstream and get to sort of sources of problems and not symptoms. And that's a key critical distinction with a strategist. I would say the fourth habit is thinking in questions. If you listen to a strategist, they don't offer many answers. In fact, they do the opposite. They talk mostly in questions to try to get a better sense of what's needed. And then when they do speak in answers, it's usually a pretty thoughtful, choiceful decision. But if you had to break down their questions to answers, I'd say they're probably 80% of the time they're asking questions, and about 20% of the time they're talking in answers. And then the final habit, I would say, for a strategist, the fifth one, is the ability to see around corners. And so that means the ability to forecast, have a theory of things to come, that they have the ability to really say, hey, I think the world is moving in this direction. And because of that, I think over the next 12, 15, 24 months or longer, you're going to see these trends prevail. And if there's anything that's obvious about a strategist, is they're future focused. They listen to the future and they not only try to react to it, they try to shape it. I think that's a big distinction amongst strategists versus non-strategists. Non-strategists, they just kind of react to the world, right? They just try to put out fires and do those drills. A strategist knows that they're losing if they're reacting, right? So they try to anticipate, get out in front of issues, and hopefully address it, again, kind of at the source as opposed to the symptom.
Absolutely. So where can people get the book?
So great question. Yeah, you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, those various providers. It just came out, so we're definitely trying to promote it as much as we can. But hopefully, people have already written in and given me feedback on, finding it to be more practical and useful. I'm an academic by training, but I really tried to make this accessible to a much broader audience. So it's really designed to be applicable both for followers as well as leaders, because at the end of the day, my core thesis is that if strategy is just happening in the C-suite, it's destined to fail, right? Because what we've seen over and over and over is, it gets created in the C-suite and they're supposed to be doing the kind of the real heady, deep work. And then the idea is that they pass it off to the rest of the organization to quote unquote, implement it. And I consider that to be one of the fastest ways to fail, because what happens is the C-suite thinks it's a great idea. They think it's the gospel and the best thing happening. It actually transitions to the rest of the organization, and then it just falls flat more oftentimes than not. And that's because the rest of the organization is renting it and they're not owning it. And so if you really want your organization to own strategy, not rent it, but own it, they have to have their fingers on it, right? They have to help create it. And so that happens when you have strategists at all levels of the organization. It can't just be a country club sport, in which just a few people are involved, right? It's got to get folks off the sidelines. It's got to be a team sport for the entire organization.
Yes, and I have to agree with you, because I've worked in corporate America long enough to know you've got all of these people in the boardroom planning out all of this stuff, and then here they give it to us and we have to implement it, and we were like, oh my God, what were they thinking?
Totally. And because of that, it can be one of the most exclusive, if you think about how strategy is often made, it's made in C-suites, and we know C-suites are disproportionately white and male and older. And so what does that tell us? It's the product of that thinking then gets passed on to the organization, and then oftentimes the organization looks much different than that and thinks much different than that and acts much different than that. So if you really want to, make good on, organizational promises to inclusion, it's best to have an inclusive approach to strategy work. And that can only happen if you're doing, if you're training strategists at every level of your organization. Because if it's just, the elite few that are making it, you can't expect the rest of the organization to really lean into it and make it work, right? So I talk about moving from the elite few to the empowered many, right? To make it, to filter it all the way through the organization. And And what we, when we think about organizations that thrive, they're ones in which everybody in the organization understands what the strategy is because they've had their hands in helping to make it.
And it makes a difference because you feel like you are a part of the solution, so to speak. When you actually have been given the opportunity to pose your views. And what I always see is, a lot of times we can't all think of everything.
Yeah.
You need different perspectives,
Great
period.
point. Yeah, great point. And you can't get that wisdom of the crowd if you're only doing it with, 4 people behind closed doors, right?
Absolutely.
So what I talk about is the need to secularize strategy, right? So it's a term that comes from more of a religious domain, and the idea is it can't be these high priests that are sitting in a room and the smoke goes up in the chimney like picking a pope, and the rest of the organization has to wait until they do their work, and then only then can they engage. Again, it's just every reason for the rest of the organization just not to want to. I mean, trust me, they'll pay lip service. They'll say that that the ideas are great, but when it comes to actually owning it and executing on it, you're asking them to do a lot because they don't feel engaged or involved. So the suggestion here is that if you can get them thinking like a strategist, they'll feel a sense of ownership because it's part of what they do every single day. So it's a great point, Ida, that if the rest of the organization isn't bought in, there's little chance of it being successful.
Absolutely. And it's going to be a lot of resistance going on as well. I mean, I get it, Ryan. I get it. So I've been in plenty of planning. It's only one management that I was involved with where we actually did strategy implementation and the whole team was involved.
Yeah.
And I out of my 40 something years of working, one company.
Okay. Yeah. And so as you point out, I mean, it's the exception, not the rule, right? And so
Yes.
There's actually this great strategy professor. He's retired now, but his name's Roger Martin, and he's got the best, in my view, the best explanation of strategy and execution. He said that both strategy and execution require choices, right? You have to choose. I've got a decision to make. Am I going to do X or am I going to do Y? He said our mistake is that we think that the choices only happen when you're building strategy, and the execution just kind of, the idea is that organizations should just, have the sort of the workers to just shut up and execute. His point is that you actually make choices in both realms. And so strategies actually in both cases, both in the strategy making, but also in the execution. So if they're both, driven by choices, the distinction actually doesn't really matter if you're doing strategy building or strategy execution. It requires choices that have to be made that are critical to the organization. So, he would also advocate for not making this, gulf or distinction between only some people can do strategy work and only some people can do execution. To be a strategist, you have to be able to do both at a really high level.
I would agree. And the name of your book again?
Strategists First, How to Defeat the Strategy Trap.
Yes. And I mean, you definitely laid it out in this conversation very well. And as you were talking about it, I could see in different organizations that I was a part of where the strategy was horrible.
Yeah.
It was absolutely horrible.
And in many cases, I mean, again, if you dig into the academic literature, so not only were the strategies probably not effective, but the real aha moment for a lot of academics that work in this area is that most people in the organization can't even tell you what the strategy is, right? They did a pretty interesting longitudinal study and found that, by the time you get down to sort of the frontline workers, they struggle to even name, a fraction of the number of strategic priorities for the organization, right? So many of them couldn't even name 2 out of 10 strategies that the organization was pursuing. And the other really, I include this in the book, the other really kind of revealing insight from that study was that not only did the frontline employees, who were actually the ones living the strategy every day, right? Not only did they have a really limited knowledge of what it was, if you back up and you think, okay, well, the higher you go up the chain, presumably the better is the understanding. What they found is actually the biggest drop off was between the C-suite's the C-suites and their direct reports, right? That was the sort of the biggest gulf of understanding. And again, I think it was based on this idea that, because the direct reports were involved with the strategy work, they just presumed that their teams would understand what they were doing and why it was important. And it speaks to your point earlier, Ida, is, if you think it's not only is it a challenge around the efficacy of the strategy, but if your employees don't even understand it, right? They're not even aware of what the priorities are. I mean, how could it possibly have any chance of being successful?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like the way you say, about owning it. When you're part of the solution, you feel like you own it. You own a piece of it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the inclusion thing as well. Just because I might be the worker B doesn't mean that that makes me even more important if what you're building is going to affect me.
Yeah. The other thing I talk about in the book is, again, if you focus on strategy and not the strategist, what you come to realize is that organizations have a kind of episodic relationship to strategy, meaning, if an organization is going to have a change in the CEO, they'll typically kind of, sunset or kind of, just slowly depart from their strategy because they expect, a new CEO to come in and have a new strategy. Same thing when they're hiring a chief strategy officer, right? They'll kind of put pause on their current strategy and let that person come in and sort of take the reins. And you realize is what I call these strategy outages, right? So imagine like electrical outages, right? You go certain amounts of time with no electricity. In these cases, organizations essentially will push pause on strategy because they're waiting for, a different leader to come in, or they just, maybe completed one big strategy build, and they're waiting a few months to rebuild before they do their next one. These strategy outages can last for, weeks, months, potentially even a year or more. And it's the result of, again, focusing on strategy and not strategists, because if you had strategists in your organizations working every single day, there's no off switch to them, right? They're strategists no matter what, right? And so they don't need to be told by the CEO, how can I be strategic? They already know it. They do it every single day. And so there's no gaps or these outages when you have folks who are doing it every single day, self-motivated, have the self-initiative to do this work. They don't have to be told what to do, right? They are just, they're trained to be strategists. So they know how to go into any situation and come out with a strategic, outcome because it's who they are. It's not simply what they do.
Yes. And I agree with you. Wow, this has been definitely interesting. Just talking about strategy and how it affects the workplace, how it affects the decision making, and the importance of inclusion.
Yep.
All of that is wrapped up in the strategy of the strategist, because people have to be involved in order to understand. You made me think of a time the management came up with this room that the computer stuff was supposed to be in. And when it came to me, I'm looking at it like I could just look at it and tell it was not going to work.
Yep. So imagine if you were a strategist in that situation. I mean, I'm sure you already were, but imagine if you were recognized and validated within your organization as a strategist, right? Then you have the ability to, again, have the ability to come to the conversation and say, hey, I'm seeing around the corner here, and this doesn't line up with where I see the trends in society going, or whatever that situation is. When you're not recognized and validated as a strategist, it's hard to bring up those issues, right?
Yeah.
But if you believe that you're a strategist and your organization recognizes you as such, you feel like you have an obligation to speak up and to speak out when you feel like the organization is either taking the wrong approach or has missed something, just blindsided by an issue. And again, it gets to that ownership. If you think about when someone rents a property, right? They're not changing the air filters on the HVAC. They're not going out of their way to pull the weeds. They use the property and they leave. But if you own it, right, you take care in all of those pieces. You take a pride of ownership. So think about that. Like, when it comes to strategy, if you were an owner as opposed to a renter, your ability to really dig in and kind of get to the right place, your commitment level is going to be much higher. So again, throughout the book, I keep talking about the need for organizations to start with strategists first, right? Make sure that your folks on your teams are recognized, supported, and invested as strategists. Only then can you really do great strategy work, because they'll be equipped to do it, right? And we have to ask ourselves, I mean, if you think about organizations, oftentimes organizations will ask themselves, well, do I have enough creative people on my staff in order to be innovative, right? They'll sort of ask themselves. What they often don't ask is, do I have enough strategists on my team to be strategic, right? They just assume it's going to happen without actually investing in the people power to make it happen. And so that's what this book is designed to really rewire your thinking about strategy and suggest that you can't talk about strategy unless you back up and start talking about strategists first.
Yes, exactly. Wow, Ryan. This has been a really empowering conversation. I am definitely looking forward to reading the book because, this is important to business owners, your home. In our homes, we don't think of it, but as moms and dads, we're strategists.
Definitely. You have to be, right?
You definitely have to be.
Yep.
There's a plan for the whole day. Everything gets planned out and executed.
Yep. You got to be able to see around corners to know what's coming down the pike, right? So there's an element here that's obviously professional, but Ida, it's such a great point. There's a big element that's also personal, right? Because we know if we are strategic in our thinking and doing as individuals, right, in our own personal lives, things just typically go much better, right? So the more deliberate we can be, the more disciplined we can be, all of those things really help out, not just in the work environment, but our non-work environment as well.
Absolutely. So again, the name of the book and where people can get the book.
So thank you. It's Strategists First, How to Defeat the Strategy Trap. And it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, various other outlets. We'd love to hear from you. Got a dedicated website, ryanhayes.com. Got some other resources there, as well as some questions. As writing about strategy, if I'm going to be a good strategist, which I need to live up to the book, I need to get some feedback on what resonates with folks. And so I want to hear from the readers about what was useful and what was not. I tried to write a book that again was very practical, but provided some important. There's a lot of academic citations in the book. I try to synthesize a lot of information for folks. There's by way of example, there's 374 endnotes, so it's a well-researched book, but the writing is meant to be lean and practical. So I hope that the readers feel that, and I'd love to hear from them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for gracing our platform and definitely defining strategy and what it means to be a strategist and why it's so important to look at that piece first.
Wonderful. Thank you for your great questions, Ida. I really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you to our guests and you, our valued audience, for stopping by. We truly appreciate you. Many blessings to you and yours.